This podcast is sponsored by Aleppo Restaurant on Wonderland Road North and A. Miller George Funeral Home, where every life is celebrated, and their sister company Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever and whenever you may be listening, and a special hi to our friends on Facebook Live. You've tuned into another edition of the Vicar's Crossing podcast. The Vicar's Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And my name is Rob Henderson, and I'm the priest at Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Anglican Church in London.
And a resplendent man, if I might say. My name is Kevin George. I'm a priest at St. Aidan's Church, and an overall goofball.
He's okay.
He's okay.
He's all right.
He's doing fine. He's
He's
doing
doing
fine.
okay. And producer Iain's here too. Hello, producer Iain.
I'm here, right here. Hello.
How's the battle?
It's great.
Going good?
It's going, yeah.
Going good, all right. And a very special guest I'm going to say in studio. I guess we can call this our studio.
The studio today.
This is our studio.
Yeah, this
Elsbeth
is the
Dodman
Vicar's Crossing studio.
We should get a sign on our door.
We should.
Anyway.
We should.
On air.
Elsbeth Dodman is back with the Vicar's Crossing once again, and
Hello.
we're happy to have you back. How are you?
Yeah, I'm not doing too bad. It's a good day out there.
Good. It is a good day. It's a beautiful day in southern Ontario.
It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. A beautiful day in the neighborhood.
Oh, no.
Yeah, keep your shoes on, Kevin.
Okay.
Yeah, we want to say hi to our sponsors too. These folks have been so generous to us to
Incredible.
help keep this thing on the air and keep it going. And that's Aleppo Restaurant on Wonderland Road here in London, and also A. Miller George Funeral Home, where every life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Dave Mullen, great guy over there.
Yep,
Legend.
great staff,
Dave Mullen.
great group of folks.
Yeah.
In both those places. So we thank them
Yeah.
again for their participation in the Vicar's Crossing.
Yep.
All right. So what's been going on since we last talked?
Yeah, this is. I feel like the Friday. I don't know if you ever watch Stephen Colbert, the late night with Stephen Colbert. Friday night is always taped on Thursday.
Okay.
And so he always makes a joke at the beginning about what a great Friday crowd it is.
Yeah, great
because
Friday
it's
crowd.
they're not really a Friday crowd, so it's
Yeah.
a little bit like that.
Brilliant.
But yeah, since we last talked, there's not a lot changed. We had a great conversation with Jerry LaHaye.
We did.
on
Just
the
moments
Vicar's
ago.
Crossing, just a
literally,
moments
folks.
ago.
Yeah.
And if you've already listened to it, then you already know what an important conversation that is. If you've not, every episode is online, and you'll be able to go back and listen to that. So please do that. It was a great chat.
Great.
It was.
I know that we just in the last 5 minutes, our email has just exploded with questions because everybody wants to ask Iain something.
Absolutely.
But not only can we
absolutely.
ask Iain something, ladies and gentlemen, it's time now for our Vicar's Crossing classic segment that we like to call Ask Iain Anything. Wow.
Oh, boy.
That's very deep. That's very deep indeed. So once again, the listeners just keep firing emails at us.
Yeah,
in
your
hopes-
phone died, didn't it?
My phone died.
Killed your phone.
It killed my phone. I had so many emails that the phone actually crashed. But I know you
Yeah.
people out there in Facebook world, you're probably going to type messages in right now. Like right now, you're going to type them in.
Do it.
You're gonna have a question for Iain. You're gonna type it in right now. But even if you don't, we have a question for Iain.
Oh.
And this is a very last question was about the election, I believe.
Yep.
Yes, it was.
Yep.
This one here is equally serious.
Gotcha.
So this question comes to us from a listener who is quite concerned about food and
Me
food,
too.
and food choices. So this listener wants to know what is your favorite go-to comfort food? Like if you are feeling a little blue, or you need a little extra push, or you just need something, what is it that you go to
You've
eat?
just
What's
had
your-
to spend the afternoon with two middle-aged Anglican clergy.
yeah.
And it's just time to kind of chill.
Yeah. So what are you gonna have?
So, wow. I am a huge fan of pad thai.
Oh,
Really?
pad thai. Nicely done.
Elspeth likes pad thai. She's
But
on over
no
here.
bean sprouts. No, they disguise
no, Iain
themselves
likes the
as
bean
delicious
sprouts.
rice noodles. They are not delicious rice noodles at all.
I just like what. So there's a place called like Kenai or something like that
Yeah,
on
Warncliffe and
Yeah.
and Riverside.
Riverside, yeah,
Shout
around
out.
there.
Ian would like a free meal.
Plug. Yeah, hit me up. Yeah, you'll be able to find me.
Great pad thai there, I might say.
Yeah, and just their chick pad thai.
Jack Tok Thai.
Chicken pad thai is fantastic. So, however, it's not every day I get it. It's like a little special treat because once if I have it every day, then I get sick of it, obviously. So, give and you take.
I think my guilty pleasure lately has been ramen noodles.
Oh, really?
Oh,
Yeah.
those are
Interesting.
good.
Yeah.
I just I get home. I what I want. I just put the kettle on and I make a bowl of ramen noodles.
Really?
Yeah.
See,
Can't get enough.
I'll go right off the charts because this is where I go when I just need to kill the pain.
What do you
That's
have?
just a great big gushy apple fritter from Tim Hortons.
Oh,
Just take that donut and just get the
Just that thing.
get
Yeah.
the icing and the sugar all over the
Yeah,
fingers
yeah,
and all over the face.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
a thing that's been circulating in our house also is powdered donuts.
Donuts.
Oh yeah.
So what about you,
Those-
Elsbeth?
oh,
if
man.
you if you've got to have that go-to food, what's that comfort food going to be?
Well, right now, because it depends on what's in the house. Because sometimes you're home and you open the fridge and you have food to make other food.
Yeah.
But you don't
Yeah.
have
Snacks.
food. But right now, and around this time of the year, we have an old gingerbread cookie recipe that we got from the Fanshawe Pioneer Village. Those things.
Oh.
Gingerbread
are
cookies.
Wonderful.
Road trip.
So right now we've got them, and their
Gary,
mom's got those little.
Nancy,
those
we're
little-
coming over.
Coming
Little
over.
Put on the
cutters.
kettle.
Yeah, yeah.
We're coming for some
For
gingerbread.
gingerbread.
And they're all like little cutout leaves and everything.
Oh, Jerry, get that kettle boiling.
They're wonderful.
Oh,
and
that
I
sounds
make
fantastic.
them, but also my mom makes them. I mean, the recipe page is all like old and
Yeah.
got flour and,
those are the
and
best,
stuff
yeah.
all over it. But it's
Oh, yeah.
great.
I'm
Best
going
kind
to
of
Nancy's house
recipes.
for.
I might have to give
Yeah.
up the apple fritter. That sounds pretty good.
You guys can all ride on the back of my bike as I bike home.
I like it. Good. All right, we're going to get into a little music trivia here. This is a new segment on the Vickers Crossing that we like to call the Music Morsel, and it's an opportunity for Kevin and I to try to stump Ian and Ian to do the same to us with music. So
All right,
Kevin's
Ian.
got a clip from a song.
Yep.
Yep.
This song comes out of the 70s. Okay. It's by a great band.
Okay.
I'm going to play it. I'm going to give you 12 seconds.
Okay.
Okay.
Sure.
Cold late nights so long ago when I was not so strong, you know.
I gave you 14 seconds because I wanted to
Dang.
hear some of it.
Wow. My guess is Long Ago by Janis Joplin.
Oh, well, just a little bit off.
Yeah. What about you, Elsbeth?
a bit
Any
outside.
idea?
No, sorry. We were raised on Joni Mitchell and Simon and Garfunkel, I'm afraid.
If you know Nancy
Brilliant.
and Gary,
You know what?
you know how funny that is.
Yeah. These girls though were around back, late
Yeah.
70s. They
Yeah.
really started to.
They were, yeah. This
to
is
kick it in.
this is a cutting edge because there was something special about those rockers, in that there weren't a lot of hard rocking women groups, and these are two sisters. Any closer now?
Twisted Sisters?
No,
Dang.
No, not Twisted Sisters. I think
Their
we're real
last names
sisters.
are Wilson
Ann and Nancy
and
Wilson.
It's a
who
band
created
called
the
Heart.
group called Heart. Yeah.
Incredible
No,
band.
that's
And there's Barracuda.
Barracuda. And if you want to
Barracuda.
really hear something, look up Hart's rendition at the Rockefeller Center, whatever it's called,
Yeah.
of "Stairway to Heaven."
They do a Stairway to Heaven in front of Led
In
Zeppelin.
front of Led
They were
Zeppelin.
honoring Led Zeppelin, and
Wow.
Ann
Yeah.
and Nancy Wilson did
Yeah.
Stairway to Heaven with a full choir.
Yeah, with
It's
a choir,
the most
an
incredible
orchestra,
piece of
orchestra.
music,
Yeah,
Really
incredible.
highly recommend it.
Yeah.
So.
Wow.
What do you
There
got for
go.
us?
All righty,
Ian?
Ian, shoot,
So
fire away.
this one might be easy for you. This has been on the radio. I will give you 12 seconds.
The club isn't the best place to find a lover, so the bar is where I go.
What you think?
Oh,
I know it's Ed
Oh.
Sheeran,
oh, it's Ed Sheeran. Okay, over to you then.
but what's the name of the song though? That's the thing.
Love is
Can
where I go.
Can I text my son?
No.
No phone a
call-
friend here.
no phone a
Cheating.
friend.
No phone of friends.
Okay,
Zero.
so I don't know it. So what about you, Elsbeth? What's the name of the song?
Shape of You.
Yes,
Shape
that is
of
correct.
You.
Shape of You.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
Definitely
Yeah.
not about me.
Yeah, it's not about Kevin. We don't want to know the shape of you.
What the shape you in?
Right,
I've heard
right.
that
No,
one
that's
on,
great
on the YouTube rounds. I'll put on
Yeah.
some music while I'm drawing comics, and that's YouTube has thrown that out at me
Yeah,
a few
it's
times.
yep,
You know,
No, I love it,
definitely
Sharon. Yeah.
a
Great.
popular song.
Well, there you go. All right. Want me to introduce Elsbeth now?
Please.
Sure.
No, I mean, for those of you who didn't see last week's podcast on Facebook Live over here, hi. We're gonna retrace our steps a little bit, but we're also gonna jump into some topics we didn't talk about last week.
Yeah.
So let me just share with you again a little bit about Elsbeth. She's a 31-year-old autistic Londoner. She has her BA in Fine Arts and History and Anthropology from the University of Toronto.
Nice.
We won't hold that against her. But I do remember a T-shirt, by the way. When I came to Western in 1994, came to Huron, I went to a homecoming game, and I have a T-shirt that says in big letters, "Everybody yell, U of T sucks."
I was out in Mississauga. I
Yeah.
made friends with the local deer.
Yeah.
And I went there because it was one of the only schools that had a joint program with Sheridan. So
Okay.
I got my the high academic courses, and then I just took off over to Sheridan and did art and made art. So
Okay.
but 90% was there for the deer.
Okay, well, that's good. The deer are nice. So they're like a deer in the headlights in Toronto is what I hear. But anyway, University of Toronto, and she has her postgraduate certificate in Autism Behavioral Sciences. Elsbeth has been giving public talks and presentations on Autism Spectrum Disorders since she was 18 years old, actually. She lives at home with her parents, Gary and Nancy, who make incredible gingerbread
from what I
cookies,
hear.
which we
Yeah.
want to come
We're
and
coming
have.
over.
We'd like to do, if we need to take this thing on the road, we will, just to get the cookies. And she also has 2 cats over there. And I think that Elsbeth probably tries to keep everybody in line over there. We're glad you're here. Welcome, Elsbeth.
Thank you for having me again. Hello again.
Well, we know, Elsbeth, you're very passionate about advocacy, and especially advocacy for those living with autism, and more particularly adults living with autism. So we hope you can kind of start things off by sharing with our listeners today some of the challenges that you and other autistic adults face. A little bit about what the current state of affairs for an autistic adult is in the province of Ontario and even across Canada.
Absolutely. So right now, in Ontario, at the very least, once you hit 18, services end. So we have very much marketed autism as a children's thing, a children's diagnosis, and so there really isn't anything for adults. So once you reach adulthood, there are certain skills or things that are expected of you that you just don't expect a 6-year-old to be able to manage or do, because a 6-year-old is not going to a job interview. That's just not happening. A 6-year-old
Wait, in
is
Newfoundland, we're in the workforce. What's wrong with people in Ontario to need all this extra education?
You gotta
A
be
6-year-old in
yeah.
Newfoundland is running all kinds of businesses. Like, what do you?
out there on the boats.
Yeah. Well,
You know,
you got a fleet by the age 6. You have a fleet.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But here in Ontario, where we're landlocked,
Yeah.
no fleets, and very few supports,
Yeah.
and so that means that a lot of us have difficulty finding accessible and affordable housing.
Right.
There's a shortage of that, and wait lists for that. There is a lot of unemployment right now, according to the the Ontario Child Advocates Office, which did close under the Ford government, but they released a report, and something like 80% of Ontario autistic people are unemployed or underemployed, and underemployed is where they have a job, but it's below their education level or below their skill set. And this often means that a lot of us are living in poverty. It means that a lot of us are reliant on emergency services or funding services like ODSP or passport funding, and these are somewhat helpful, but things like ODSP are really designed to keep people in poverty. They're not really designed to help get people up out of poverty and eventually off the ODSP program, which really should be the goal. So because we're so focused on children, and don't get me wrong, focusing on children's issues is very important. It's a very noble goal. We absolutely should be dedicating our time to children's issues and making sure that our education system is equitable, making sure that parents and caregivers can navigate a system of care easily and get what they need in a timely manner to support their children. But you're going to run out of road, And eventually these children are going to hit 18 and spend the rest of their lives as adults, and there's nothing. And, so that's sort of the state of affairs for autistic people in Ontario. And it's a bit of a sad state of affairs, really. The government came in about... it's got to be almost a year now. Sorry, it's all starting to blend together after a bit. And the government of Ontario came in and said, we're going to cut the wait list. There's a wait list to get services. There's a wait list for diagnosis. We're going to cut down that wait list. And that's okay. That's a noble cause. However, it has since come out that, number one, the government manufactured that wait list. And number two, there really isn't any one wait list within the autism spectrum. There are many wait lists to get different services, to get a diagnosis.
Because different people need different services.
Absolutely, absolutely. And so what the government of Ontario said was, instead, we are going to offer parents a wad of money for them to go and find the service that they think is best for them. And that sounds fantastic on paper. But the problem in practice came up very quickly. Number one, the amount of money that people were getting was nowhere near enough to support or afford services. Number two, if you were living in a northern or a rural community, where there is no speech-language pathologist, period, you cannot buy speech-language pathology. Like, you can't buy speech-language therapy.
You can't get what doesn't
It's
exist.
not there. Yeah.
Exactly. You could give them $1 million. If there's no one there selling speech-language therapy, you can't get it.
And as I understand what they were proposing, it was a lump sum that would sort of that will be given until the person became 18, right?
Yes, although the number would decrease as that child got older. So
I see.
It was not based on what the child's needs were.
Right.
It was based on
age.
So, for instance, because autism is a very broad spectrum, and people like to look at that spectrum as a linear, very autistic, not autistic at all. It's really more of a color wheel of needs and spectrum of needs. And so you might have a child who is 10 and only needs $200. I'm just making that number up. They only need $200 worth of funding, but they're being given $500 worth of funding.
Right.
Well, they don't really need it. Now, their brother, who is 14, is receiving only, $300 of funding because he's older, but he needs like $1,000 of funding. Again, I'm just pulling numbers out of the air. So
thankfully, you just pull them out of your ear.
When
I pull numbers, I pull them straight out of my ass.
But not a pretty sight. But that's the discrepancy, right? That's the point.
Yes. No one was getting what they needed. Right. And as soon as you turned age 5, that amount of cash that you were being given dropped dramatically. And that's that focus on children, and the younger the better. But once you age out of that system, we have nothing for you and there are no supports. And so families were saying, I have an adult child, he's 25 now, my spouse and I are getting older, we can't necessarily support him anymore, it's only a matter of time before my husband has a stroke or I, get diagnosed with cancer. What do I do? Where do I go? How do I support my child and make sure that they are living in the best case scenario, that they are living their full and best life? And for autistic people who are autistic people ourselves, we're saying, now wait a minute, we would like to be able to work. We would like to be able to afford a home or a place to live. We would like financial stability and to be able to get out into the community and participate. Though the challenge for us is sometimes we don't know how to get there or what's available or how to organize ourselves to get to that place where we can be doing those things. And so obviously, many parents were very upset with the government's decision. We showed up on Queen's Park lawn. We were protesting outside of our MPP's offices and outside of Doug Ford's office. And
your buddy Doug.
Oh yeah, he and I are not good friends, but that's another story for later in the podcast. But we protested, and finally the government said, All right, fine. And please know, 6 months went by. So this is a long time for families to say what we're being given isn't enough, what we need to support our children isn't enough, and in the meantime, government was also cutting things for education. So EAs, which disproportionately affected disabled students, including autistic students. But finally the government said, all right, fine, get off our lawn. We're going to readdress this, but
Get off
get off our lawn.
Did they make the sign of the cross? Take your tent,
No.
take your shoes, take your mother, get off the lawn.
Not quite.
Wow.
But I think they probably would have burst into flame if they made the sign of the cross. Sorry, you can edit that out too.
No, leave it in. That's good.
So they said, fine, we're going to reassess it, and we're going to make this new plan that's going to come out in April 2020. So that's the new fiscal year. So that means that this fiscal year is flushed down the toilet. It's a wash.
It's gone.
Forget it.
Yeah.
That's a year that for
Lost
some
year.
kids, that kids lost. Kids lost a year. Adults on the spectrum called it Tuesday, and we lost. That was another year of opportunity for us to even get the ball rolling, and we'll just have to sit back and say, well, maybe next year. Well, maybe next year I'll be 32, and they'll start talking about autistic adults.
Right.
They had a round table. And I was pleased that they decided to have a round table. Wish they'd done it from the start. That might have been nice. But they got 2 autistic people on this table out of 20. And on the one hand, that is a microcosm of issues facing autistic adults and autistic people in general. Is that you sort of get tokenized if you're invited to the table at all. So. It's the Ontario Autism Plan, but nobody on the spectrum really has a say. They just sort of show up and say, here, Elsbeth, here's what we decided on your behalf.
Here's what's best for you.
Yeah, exactly. We're going to tell you what's best for you because for us...
How very colonial.
Oh, it's very on brand. But it's par for the course. But at the same time, it's very frustrating because autistic people work hard for our voices. Whether we speak, whether we use sign language, whether we type or use adaptive technology to get our voices out, we work hard for our voices. And so to not even be included or to be treated as though we're too stupid to even be at the table about what our needs are.
Yeah.
I'm not from St. John's, Newfoundland. I've never been there. I couldn't tell people from St. John's, Newfoundland what's best for them, and I shouldn't show up in St. John's, Newfoundland with a piece of paper with their name on it and say, here, I've decided what's best for St. John's.
Many bureaucrats have.
And how well did it go
It
for
never
them?
goes well. Well, but it's indicative of the colonial attitude we have in Canada and British. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
Right, so when we're talking about then, obviously you're advocating for a change in public policy on probably many levels. Would one of those levels be representation then? Is that something that you really would like to see?
Oh, absolutely. On the one hand, our community was thrilled having 2 people. We've never had 1 person.
10%.
Now we got 2. We got 10% for once. So we're all standing around high-fiving each other like, yeah!
We're tithing the autistic.
Yeah. But at the same time, you're telling me that in Ontario, the largest province, the best you could come up with was only 2? You couldn't find 3 or 4 or 5 or 6.
Now you're getting outrageous now.
Nah, I mean... Why not?
Yeah, no, I agree.
Though, I mean, what about people from our northern communities?
Yes.
What about people from the rural communities? What about new immigrant families? What about francophone communities? What about, what about our LGBT community that intersects with autism? What about, the list could go on. For the francophone bit, and I hadn't realized this till I got the opportunity to speak to another parent, was that... She had her son assessed here in London, and he had the assessment done in English, but his first language was French. So when the assessment came back, the assessment said, your child is extremely impaired. Your child has such high needs and doesn't understand even the basic stuff. And the mom
It's
said,
ridiculous, isn't it?
you assessed him in English. If you'd assessed me in Mandarin, I'd have
gonna
scored.
I'll assess you
It's been a mess.
We're gonna do Portuguese today.
Yeah.
Just for shits and giggles.
and see how that child does. And the response was, well, if you had wanted, you the parent could have been his interpreter. And she said, that's not my job. I'm his mother.
That's exhausting.
We're in a bilingual country, and you can't even provide my child with French language
Right.
assessments to see how to assess him, to see how he's doing and what his needs are. And so it just, to not have autistic people at the table, if even the people who are leading the charge
Yeah.
are not changing, how can we expect the general public to change?
Right.
You know.
That's a fair point. Now, speaking of un pays bilingue, or a bilingual country,
Not bad.
I don't think that was
Flexing.
correct. I don't think that was correct. But appeal to Jen Aston, if you're listening out there, Jen Anderson. Let me know how un pays bilingue sounds, please. But a federal election coming up.
Oh boy, is
Where,
it?
which
Speaking
is
of public policy changing,
yeah, taking his public policy and having that advocate voice. And you were here on Sunday night. Just a few days ago, we held a debate here of local candidates for this riding, where the podcast is recorded in London West.
This one.
This one right here, baby.
We're sitting in it.
And it was a big night. Rob was with us. Producer Iain was there, being the sound man. We used the Vickers Crossing sound gear so that everybody could hear.
sounded good.
Yeah,
It was a privilege for them.
sound was good. And Elsbeth, you were there.
I was there. I was in the front row.
You were in the
Front
front
row
row.
seats.
And so I guess you had a couple of questions that you fired at those candidates, and you heard their platforms on the issues, all the issues, but certainly you asked a couple of very specific ones. I wonder if you can share with us and with the listeners now about the upcoming election and how you felt about that debate. Did it change your mind at all? Was there did you going into the debate have a thought and coming out have a different one, or were your thoughts more clarified? And with that, I guess follow-up question is, where would you like to see public policy, like with that, with this federal election? What will be your hope in terms of the concerns that you have around autism? As you've stated, that it's also about the adults, and we know that this is something that's largely in a provincial jurisdiction. But what would it look like to have a national autism policy?
Well, that's a lot of questions all at
Yeah, I
once.
know. I'm just
gonna-
spitballing here. Okay, so
Yeah.
but I'll tell you, you should be able to deal with this.
Oh yeah. Yeah. No.
This is your speed,
We're gonna-
okay?
Help us, Facebook.
Facebook, keep track of those questions for me.
Someone
so-
take notes.
Need a note taker. Okay, so on that first one, yes, I attended the debate. I do want to just say to our listeners, I do come in with my own personal bias. I am not an unbiased person when it comes to politics.
You didn't come in an undecided voter, probably.
I did not come in as an undecided voter. So if anybody's listening and they find that I am being biased, I'm sorry. That's real life.
Yep.
You're going to need to deal with that.
Yeah, he'll be okay.
I came in with a bias. I knew who I was going to vote for, and I did not leave thinking I was going to vote for somebody different. So in that way, it didn't change. I was interested in hearing what the Greens had to say, because apart from Elizabeth May at the leadership debates, hadn't really heard about from anybody else. So hearing from somebody within my own riding was interesting, and I felt that the candidate whose name, I'm awful with names,
Marianne Hodge.
Marianne Hodge, thank you,
Yeah.
spoke very well. I felt she was very good. I liked her. I liked Shauna from the NDP.
Yeah.
The Liberals, I was sort of, was a third on my list of people who I liked, and I think if I had to pick between the two gentlemen from the Libertarian and the PPC party, I would spoil my ballot in protest. Which is legal, by the way, for listeners.
Yes,
you can legally spoil your ballot as protest. That is a legal move.
But
Have
help us
fun.
understand what was offensive about those two. To you.
I've-
I don't mean to say.
Yeah.
Let me be clear to the listeners. I'm not saying these two men are offensive.
No,
what I'm saying is their attitude or their approach to politics was, I think, fair to say, offensive to you. So, what in particular how would you characterize that?
Well, I'm going to characterize it within the context of the two questions I asked. So my first question was about poverty, homelessness, the drug addiction that we see in our downtown core in London. I work downtown. I have gone to school downtown, and it's spiked and it's gotten quite bad. And it's appalling to see that in a country so wealthy, and so capable that we cannot care for people or provide adequately for people who are struggling. And my fear is that if this level keeps up come winter, we are going to see more trouble health-wise. At least in summer, it was warm enough outside to sleep outside. In winter, that won't be the case. When I asked, I made sure to phrase this and say to the candidates, we do live and die by your choices. This isn't a game for us. This is, for people who are living in poverty. It's politics isn't. You don't get you don't get to be unbiased. It's your life. And if you're in a minority, if you're somebody who is really struggling, a politician's policies can really lift you up, or it can end you. And so this wasn't a game. And I think the reason I was displeased with the candidate for the PPC party was his first part of his response was to take a dig at the Liberals and say, well, I'm surprised the Liberal candidate didn't blame Stephen Harper. And I did say audibly, though he didn't hear me, what part of this not being a game did you not understand?
Yeah, I heard you.
What part of not a game was not clear?
Well, the question wasn't for political points.
It wasn't. It's people's lives, and that's not political points. That's not, I don't want to hear you dig at other politicians. I want to hear what you have to say. Now, I further didn't like his response because he said something to the effect of, and I'm not quoting directly, this was a few days ago, please forgive me if it's not word for word, that, we're poor because we're not taking care of ourselves. We're spending money on other countries, like solar panels for other countries. And really, Elsbeth, you're poor because we bought some solar panels for a country in Africa. Like, no. Sit down. No.
Sit down, sir.
No.
That is incorrect.
I'm sorry.
That guy,
the adults
not my
are,
kind of guy.
The adults are speaking. You can go have a seat at the back. Like, and I leaned over to my mother and said, Jesus would have dragged him out and whipped him by now. But we have a phrase at home, Jesus loves you, but you're driving the rest of us crazy. Mm-hmm. And I think I felt offended because he sat at the foot of the altar.
It is offensive.
He sat at the foot of the altar in a church and said very anti things. He was the guy that Jesus would have had a parable for. He'd have been a guy in a crowd who asked Jesus a question, and Jesus said, "Come here, bud. I got a story to tell you.
For you.
Truly, I tell you.
Yeah. Very
Don't be a jerk.
Don't be a jerk.
No, to sit there and be very.
So
it's all about us. It's all about me.
A sincere question here. I mean,
Yeah.
we make light of his response, but I think that I felt that you. I sensed that his answer to you felt flippant, and my sense of that was, I mean, honestly, you have suffered in your own way.
Sure. Yeah.
And your question came from an honest place in your own life, your own journey, your own suffering, and his answer was about solar panels in Africa. It was as if to say, well, if we just simply didn't sell or send solar panels overseas, your life would be a lot better, which is really juvenile.
It is.
And so I just, I want to acknowledge where all that was at for me anyway. I just thought it was, and again, this is not taking a partisan stand. It's just saying that from a human dignity perspective, I thought his answer to your very sincere question was insensitive. That's my take.
Yeah.
On that.
The libertarian gentleman suggested that poverty was just something that we'd all have to get used to. And I wanted to ask him if then we could swap yearly paychecks and see if he was going to get used to it.
Would you like to try to get used to it?
Yeah.
You too can get
Challenge.
used to it. All this can be yours.
Yeah.
I'm sure I could get used to your paycheck.
Remember years ago in the Mike Harris government, there was a guy named Tabucci. He was the social services minister, and they cut social assistance, Ontario Works, as they then named it, because it was called Ontario Welfare, but they changed the name to Ontario Works. And when people complained and marched on Queen's Park, he said, and someone said, how do you live on, and I forget what the number was at the time, but it was a very meager amount of money a week for groceries. And he said, they can eat tuna.
Yeah.
Like let them eat tuna. And so somebody took them to a grocery store and let them see just how much tuna you could buy for the thing.
Yeah.
But it's that same sort of attitude. It's that sort of flippant response from somebody who's living a very privileged life to be able to say, oh, well, you know, we got poor people. You're just going to have to learn to get used to being poor.
Part of life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eat tuna.
Yeah.
Just eat tuna.
There's a
them
song that
cake.
from
Let them eat cake, yeah.
what was it? There was a song from I'm blanking on names because I'm awful at names. It was about Richard Nixon. The song was "Called Me Rose."
Oh, yeah.
Bruce Coburn. There we go.
Yeah.
And he did "Call Me Rose" as a song, and it was Richard Nixon being reincarnated as a poor woman living in the American projects, sort of having to come back and live under the conditions of poverty that he created for people.
Right.
And well, I'm not necessarily clear on reincarnation, if that's a fact,
Yeah,
but
yeah.
there's moments in my life where I'm thinking, God, could that be just a thing?
Yeah, could that,
Yeah.
Can we have
try that out?
just a touch of that, just please
Yeah.
have that moment. No, I was disappointed in the two gentlemen that were there. I felt that that one of them was sort of a very fatalistic, very much, well, we should just give up and lie down and die, and the other, well, it doesn't work, so we shouldn't do it. Well, have you tried? Well,
Have you
trying
done- have
the
you-
same thing over and over again is lunacy, so who cares? Well,
Yeah.
okay, well, then
Actually,
you're right.
Moving on then. Yeah. moving
They
on,
keep
yeah.
attributing that to Albert Einstein, but I'm not sure he really
I
said
don't think
it.
it was
Oh, I
Albert.
don't know.
No,
Yeah.
no, I
Yeah.
don't think so.
But anyway.
But what and Kevin alluded to this just earlier, Elsbeth, before we got into all that stuff. But you come into that debate as you come into your advocacy with your own story and your own experiences and pain. And one of the things we wanted to ask you about was the recent loss of a good friend of yours. If we could hear a little bit about that. I know it certainly had an impact on you. Would you mind sharing a bit of her story and what that was all about?
Sure. So a friend of mine, and we weren't like BFFs or anything, but we knew each other, and we've
Now,
been
just so we're clear, BFF is like best friend.
best friends
for,
forever. Yeah,
Okay.
we were friends. We knew each other from different advocacy projects. She did a lot of art sales for raising money for autism awareness. She was a friend. We worked together. She helped me do. She did a video with me for the disability studies and eventually the autism course up at the university up at Western. Got a hold of the videos as well for teaching purposes to show students autistic people and what real autistic lives are like. And she's a great person. She had epilepsy as well as being on the autism spectrum. And she had a seizure at home, and she was alone, and she died. And it was a few days before she was found. And I know that from what she had told me that her parents had kicked her out of the house after her diagnosis, and her being an adult on the spectrum, she was 28 when she died. There weren't services for her. There wasn't assisted living. There wasn't, why? And I mean, on the one hand, you could have a seizure at home with your family, and you could still die, and so maybe even being at a group home, it wouldn't have mattered. But maybe they would have found her sooner. Maybe they would have gotten her help sooner. Maybe at least she wouldn't have been alone for days before somebody realized they hadn't heard from her and checked in. It's painful because that's what it is for autistic adults. You're sort of kicked out of a system, and we're here for children, and we're here for what's best for them, and we're not going to think about what happens when they get older. And then when you do get older, well, there's poor people, and we'll just have to live with that, and so you can just die. And she was 28. She had a post-secondary education. She was college educated. She'd finally gotten independent living. She had been in and out of group homes and group living situations, but she was finally independent. She was doing things that she loved with her life. I'm not trying to say that her life was complete tragedy either. She was doing great things. She had friends and people around her, but she was living alone.
That
And
she died was a tragedy.
Yes. She was living by herself, and she probably should not have been. considering that she had epilepsy, but at the same time knowing the situation around housing or emergency housing, it didn't exist. So she died alone, and I think my frustration comes that this is a great loss for our community. She was an advocate. She was a strong advocate. She was a strong young woman. She was educated. And even if she weren't educated, like, who cares? But I just,
I hear you,
Jeez.
and I guess it really amplifies what you said on Sunday night at the debate when you said these are our lives,
Right.
that you're talking about.
Yeah. It's not political points or policy lines on a piece of paper. This is.
I mean, your
this is
friend
life
here,
or death.
your friend
Yeah.
here is an example of it is someone's life.
Yeah.
And so affordable housing matters. Emergency housing matters.
Yeah. Yeah.
Adult services matter, because as you said, she's not other than. She is a child of somebody. She is a friend to people. She is, she is an educated person. She had her own identity. She did her own thing. I think too often when we look at people who are in whatever category, and autism becomes another one of those categories, it's too easy to sort of other them. So they're other than ourselves when we talk as a culture or as a society. Somehow or another, we need to break those walls down so that we're not othering people they're not other, they're who we are, they're us. It's that Ubuntu that Desmond Tutu talks about, right? That your humanity and my humanity are tied up in each other.
Yeah.
That my flourishing is dependent upon your flourishing.
Yeah.
And that my suffering and your suffering they're not separate. They're inextricable. We have to do this together.
And the only reason that they're separated is because we've decided they're separated.
That's right.
But they're not.
They're not.
And we made the decision they are.
Right.
And once you see that,
Yeah.
I mean, when you
Changes.
think about, this story that Elsbeth has just shared, like that's a sad mark on all of us. Like that, we're wounded by that loss.
Yeah.
It's a sad statement that we don't have in place what's needed to address all those things. I know for us, we're just really sorry that you lost a friend. But more than that, I'm just a little bit pissed off that once again it's too easy to dismiss these things as something that just happens because, well, as you say, as we heard the other night, people are poor, man. We have to get used to it.
Yeah. And so I think for a national autism strategy, because I know that you had asked it, I hadn't really touched on that.
Yeah.
For one thing, I would
Very
like...
good. I'm picking up on 1,000 questions. I tried to ask in one question.
Yeah, no worries. Just all of them coming at once.
I'm a little off.
Aren't we all? Oh my gosh. Documents have been written. There's the Ontario Ombudsman wrote a few years ago a document called Nowhere to Turn, which was exactly about adults, poverty, housing, and emergency housing, especially for those trying to leave and escape abusive situations or who have nowhere to turn. And if we're looking at a national autism strategy, the research is there. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. I want those documents read. I want them implemented. And I know a lot of that is very, you'd have to look at province by province because obviously, what works
Needs
for...
are different, like you said.
Yeah. What works for St. John's or what works for Newfoundland, what works for Yellowknife, what works for Ontario, very, very different animals. But, the research is there. Like we don't need to think too hard about how to take care of people in some ways. We don't need another study. We need action.
Right.
And so I would ask that a federal government say, we know we have people with disabilities, not just autism, but people with disabilities living in Canada, and they are citizens of Canada. They're not other. We have a responsibility to them too. And we have these documents that already exist, like the Ontario Ombudsman's Nowhere to Turn report, like the Child Advocate's Office, which also touched on some transition things in their document. We have something to say, which I was a part of. Again, they did mostly look at children and youth. There were adult transitions for people with disabilities, and I think ultimately I would like federal government to take a page from the Ontario Child Advocate's Office, which when that office sat down people from minority groups to say, what can we do? They sat down people from those minority groups.
Right.
They were the whole
So
group.
again, it's that key piece of having the voices that are affected at the table.
Yes, when they sat down with their program Feathers of Hope, that looked at the needs of First Nations youth in Ontario, they brought together youth from First Nations communities across Ontario, not a token few.
No.
They brought people together, and that built trust with those communities, because it wasn't just somebody coming in and saying, here's what's best, I've decided. They said, we want to talk to your youth. We want your youth to tell us their stories, and we'll turn it into the legalese, the legal documents, whatever.
Right.
But you tell us. And it built trust and community, and people were able to share. And like the project that I was a part of, the We Have Something to Say project, which looked at disability, we had people from all over. We had people who were new immigrants to Canada, and how were they navigating the system. We had people from northern communities. We had people who had acquired brain injuries. We had people with fetal alcohol
I got
syndrome.
one of those.
That's I don't know how to argue with that.
No, well, you can't. Don't try and argue with that.
No, I won't try to argue
Everybody
with that.
knows I have an acquired brain injury.
Yeah.
Catherine Ann has told everybody.
Oh gosh. But it got people together. We had people with cerebral palsy. We had people on the autism spectrum. We had people with learning disabilities. And people were brought together and accommodated. And they sat down and said, all right, here's the areas that we're looking at. Tell us your story. Tell us how we can do better. And so for the federal government to bring disabled people together from across Canada and say, what do you need? Because then you are saving time and money.
Yeah.
You know it's going to where it needs to go because you've spoken to the people.
Right.
You are building trust with that community. That community could say, hey, that government is listening because they have somebody that looks just like me. Even if it's not me, Elsbeth, who's on the board, I can say, aha,
Yes.
there's people, and they're listening to our community. So I have built confidence. You've built trust with that community. And they, it's not just about talking points anymore. And then there's the following through. And that's the part where the government falls down. Because, and I remember, if you ever watched listened to the Dead Dog Cafe, which was on CBC.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they had a segment in their comedy show about a reading of great Canadian literature. And they would read from the Aboriginal Commissioners. I don't know the full title of that report.
Yeah.
It was a 5-book document. And the straight man to the funny guy routine would say, but Jasper, we can't read the whole report. And Jasper, the funny man of their comedy trio, would say, but Tom, if we don't read the report, how will the government know what it says?
Right. That's right. Right.
Yeah.
Please know, Iain, they were 90% done with white colonialist culture. They were so salty, they were opening a McDonald's. It was beautiful.
Wow.
It was great.
What are they talking about, Rob?
That's good.
Something about salty and McDonald's?
Salty and McDonald's.
So
Yeah, I don't
just
understand.
to follow up on what you were just saying, there was a piece out of Quebec just this week from some disability advocates who were talking about a push for assistance with living. And this is in a direct response to the amount of time, energy, and money that's been directed towards assistance in dying. And I want to be clear here that this is not a statement about medical assistance in dying. That may indeed be very well required for some people. But the people who've been living with disabilities in Quebec in particular, who have now they've been in the midst of a court case, are saying, and the one guy, the thing that really struck me was he said, I'll never apologize for my own existence. My life is worth living. And then the other thing that he said in that article was that he was looking to government in the federal government to put the same energy behind providing assistance in living as they put into assistance in dying.
In dying, yeah.
Absolutely.
That, we put a lot of time and energy into helping Canadians whose suffering was such that they requested assistance in dying. And so what this person with disability is saying is, I want you to give me your attention and give me assistance in living.
Absolutely. And that's such a powerful statement, because when we look at disability, we say, oh, that's awful. I don't know that I could ever live like that. And even within the disabled community, you will get people with physical handicaps who will say, I mean, I may not be able to walk, but I'm so glad that I'm not developmentally disabled like Elsbeth is. I mean, I may not be able to walk, but I'm still higher up on that social rung. And we frame disability as a tragedy.
Yes.
As the worst case scenario, to the point that we have people who say, I will not vaccinate my child because they could wind up like Elsbeth.
Right.
And how horrible that is for our community to sit back and hear.
Yeah.
That my life is your worst case
Never mind
scenario.
the specious science behind that.
Well, never mind that.
But still the attitude that somehow or another the downside would be.
That the downside would be my life.
Yeah.
And so when I talk to people, when I go to presentations, I always end the presentation and say, I am not sad that I am autistic.
Yeah.
This has not been a tragedy.
Yeah.
I have not invited you here for a funeral. This is my life.
Right. You're not apologizing for your existence.
No, and I won't. And there are many people who say, I do not have autism.
Right.
I do not live with autism. Autism is not crashed out on my couch. He's not paying rent. That jerk owes me rent if he is.
Yes.
You know? That's not the case. I am autistic.
Right.
That's a part of who I am.
Right.
And I won't apologize for it.
Right.
And I won't hide myself away or not wave my hands or behave autistically. I'm not going to hide that for your comfort.
Right.
It is a meeting in the middle. There are lots of things that I have had to learn how to be with others.
Adjustments.
Yeah, oh sure, yeah. There's lots of things I've had to learn to sort of make peace with the neurotypical, the non-autistic society around me. But non-autistic society has to learn how to be with me
Right.
and not treat my life like my birth was not something to celebrate.
Right.
I too was made in God's image.
Absolutely.
And
Amen.
I will not apologize for it.
Amen.
And I'm not going to sit around and pretend to be something I'm not, so that other people can be comfortable and say, well, we didn't have to see a retard today.
Right.
Everything was going fine.
Yeah.
You know, that's not the case. If you don't want to see different, throw away your phone, close your laptop, move to the woods, never see anyone again, because different has always been right outside your door.
Amen.
Very powerful.
Preach.
And
Very
so
powerful.
Yeah, preach.
Preach,
and so,
sister.
and so I remember seeing a poster of and it was challenging this, and it was a poster of a baby with Down syndrome, you know, a toddler
Yeah.
with Down syndrome, and it said, "Congratulations, it's a boy," and it was really shining a light on that,
Yeah.
where disabled children were not celebrated, and sometimes weren't even shown to the parents
And
at birth, would be taken away and say, you know, no, go home, have other children.
Yeah.
Forget about it.
Yeah.
Just you'll have others. Don't worry about it. I will not be your second choice.
Right.
I am Elsbeth, and I have always been good enough.
Yeah.
You know,
I
God
feel
don't
like
make
it-
junk.
No, I feel like it should be, I am Elsbeth, hear me roar.
But it's something that you face and that you constantly have to validate when you see people, because they do see you as less.
Right, but you are God's beloved.
Oh, sure,
Just
absolutely.
as you are.
Just as anyone
Just
else.
as you are.
And yeah, and sometimes, you know, I remember a parent posting something on the Sinister Facebook. You know, God made disabled children as guardian angels
Oh,
to
yeah.
teach us
Teach us,
how to be
yeah.
better. No.
I just saw that shit the other day.
No.
I'm like, really?
No.
Just a couple days ago, I saw that and I thought, really? Disabled children are there to teach us about good parenting and all this stuff, you know?
No. That's not
This
my
is
job.
garbage.
I have work in the morning. Like,
Yeah, this is-
I'm not getting a paycheck.
This is garbage. I just, can I ask a follow up on what you just
Yeah.
you just said? You said you've had to learn to make adjustments.
Oh, sure.
Are you comfortable to talk about what that was or how that looks like for you?
Sure. So, my social so part of autism is a marked limitation in social understanding.
Yeah.
And human beings are social creatures completely.
Yeah.
How you sit, how you eat, when you eat, what you eat.
Yeah.
How long do you look at somebody before it gets awkward? How close do you stand to someone before you've invaded their personal space? What is appropriate to say?
Yeah.
To whom and when and at what time? And that's all very complicated. And a lot of you guys will just pick most of it up instinctually.
Right.
You'll just pick it up. I don't. So, for instance, and you'll love this story. When I was in high school, I had a science teacher who I really loved her. She was great, wonderful woman, likely a saint. And so when I was leaving the school, I found a dead skunk. And I thought, this is the best case of decomposition she'll want to see.
Oh, wait till she sees it.
Wait till she
She'll
sees
want to
this.
see it. She's a scientist. This is perfect. This is a great idea. A+ plan. High five self.
Yeah.
So I got a box and I was very
You
careful.
put your skunk in a
I
box.
put this skunk in a box and I carried it into school. And I'm like, this is the best plan ever. We're going to have a great day. This is going to be a
What
great
could go wrong?
What could possibly? And in my brain, everything checked out because I understood the situation and I knew that what my intentions were.
Yes.
And so everything was good. And just as I'm knocking on the classroom staff door, a little part of my brain says, this is a terrible idea. This is a terrible idea. And I was like, you can't leave me here like this. We were on board. You need to stay with me. We're in this together. Don't you leave me here. And sure enough, it was a terrible idea.
It
was a
turn
terrible
out.
idea.
Was she a little freaked out?
No, she was used to me by then, so she was like, okay. The
Elspeth
teacher
brought a skunk.
the other teacher in the staff room said, "Oh God," and ran for the windows. But the joke was on him because the school was an old building, so the windows only opened like.
Oh, he didn't
Yeah,
get a
just
big
that
breath.
little smidge.
He didn't get a big breath.
So there were lots of social things that I think we're doing fine.
Yeah, no, you're
and then
doing
it
great.
suddenly turns out we're not doing
Oh,
fine.
I see what you mean, yeah.
And so, for instance, you will get adults, and this is one of the things, please teach your children about dating, social skills, how to interact, because, some kid at school would lend me a pencil, and I thought that meant we were best friends.
Uh-huh.
Hey, they were very nice. They lent me a pencil. No, they were being friendly. They are not your friend,
Right.
And so you'll get kids in the college who will say, well, this girl was really nice to me, so we must be dating. That's right? Cool, we're going for it. And then now you're in the world of trouble because you've passed each other, you've misunderstood the situation. And so you will find autistic people sort of stumbling into really awkward situations, and really it's just sort of a miscommunication. But it's those things that you have to
So you've had to learn some of that. And how do you do that? How do you learn that? Like
practice, trial and error a lot. And I try to make sure that I have a few trusted adults around me that I feel safe to ask, how did the situation go? Was that okay?
Get feedback.
Did
right?
I
you
say
have to
that?
be open to that. Yeah.
Did I say, was that appropriate to say, or did I just think that was a good idea? And they'll say, no, Elsbeth, you did fine. You're overthinking it. Don't worry. Because you can start to overthink it.
yes.
When you don't know where the landmines are, you're just left stuck standing there saying, if I step,
That
I'm
can
going to
cause a
step on a
problem,
mine, and I don't know where it is.
That just sends you in a different problem.
Oh, exactly. You start overthinking yourself. When skunk in a box is your best idea, and people are like, trust your instincts.
Skunk in a box.
Trust your instincts, Elsbeth.
I think we have a new Saturday Night Live skit. You put your
No.
skunk in a box.
You can't trust anything your brain comes up with when skunk in a box is the best idea. So
I think we're going to title this podcast "Skunk in a Box."
Skunk in a
Yeah,
box? I
yeah.
like it.
So-
I'll make the T-shirts.
Yeah.
So it's a constant learning about how to be, and know that those things are not ingrained. You are constantly juggling those things and trying to keep all the balls in the air when you're going out to talk to people and say, oh, you haven't looked at them recently. You haven't done all these things. You haven't smile, stand up straight, don't slouch. What T-shirt are you wearing? Is it clean? I don't know. Okay. All right. Smile and nod. Now more. Thank you. And so that's very tiring because that's not your normal. You're sort of inputting this code, and by the end of the day, you're very tired.
And are your parents doing this, or assistants at school? Like who's feeding you this?
By social support.
Yeah, like in terms of you, because you're saying you learn it, right? Like you just keep repeating and trying to learn it
Yeah.
by practice and practice. But does somebody say to you, okay, Elsbeth, that like is it a therapist? Is it?
Yeah. So I do have therapy. I've been to therapy sessions up at CPRI. A part of it is just trial and error.
I got you.
Yes, I've had excellent teachers, like the science teacher who tried to walk me through why touching dead animals was bad. I politely kept out that I didn't actually touch the dead skunk. I touched it with a box. But
Skunk in a box.
yeah, but so yes, it is about having that strong social network, like strong social supports around you
Around
at
you.
school, at home, in your community that you can trust. If you don't have that,
Hard to learn.
it is hard to learn, and it's very easy for that to fall apart and for you to sort of get lost in these social interactions, and not know what to do or where to go, and therefore to step out and do something, and people around you saying that Elsbeth person is the rudest person on two legs, and we never want to see her again. Jeez, and that further isolates that person.
Yes.
That further isolates that people. So you get people who say, well, autistic people they're fine in a world of their own. That's not the case. Autistic people do want to make friends, do flourish with a strong community. We do want that. We just don't necessarily know what the steps are
Where
to
to
get to
get
that
there.
place.
Gotcha.
I heard from a young girl who asked her therapist, how much does it cost to buy a friend?
Oh.
Because the kids at school had said to her, I wouldn't be friends with you unless you paid me. And she took that literally
Sure.
because we're literal people, we're literal thinkers. So she thought, okay, all
It's
right,
incredible.
cost of friendship, let's go. It's
Yeah.
like going to the store. How much for a batch of
Yeah,
apples?
go
How much for a friend?
Buy one, yeah.
So she went to her therapist and said, how much does a friend cost? And so without those networks, it's easy for people to get lost.
Isn't it ever?
And so one of the things that I talk to parents about when I address parents, and I say the parents of the families who do the best are the ones who mind their contacts and who bang on doors and make general nuisances of themselves and don't go away. They just, they keep at it and they keep going and they, use what contacts, because I may not know, but my mom might know.
Right.
I may not know about this situation, but I know I could come to my science teacher and she's not going to screw with me.
Right.
She's not going to tell me to do something silly and,
Right.
Elsbeth doesn't know any better. Let's get her to do
Yeah. And it'd be a good chance for those of us who are leaders in faith communities to learn that we can be that person too, right?
Oh, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, the Bible's full of very literal stuff. Back I'm sitting in the pews and they're saying, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. And I was like, oh boy.
Oh yeah, this could be a problem
boy.
here. Yeah, this could be a problem.
Oh
Yeah,
boy. Jesus was a great guy, but he tells a lot of confusing stories
But all that
that
you've
mean
been-
other things.
And all that you've been talking about is, sharing some of the work you have to do as with autism around that. There's work that we need to do too, as you're mentioning. It's us coming and everyone coming together to try to say, what do I have to learn about you?
Yeah.
And because I'm doing the work too, right?
Oh, sure.
So it's just an awareness around that. Yeah.
And to be fair, that's true with everyone. Like
Sure,
when you meet
sure.
people, it's a meeting in the middle. It's a building
Yep.
a bridge. It's
Yep.
a bad relationship if one person is building most of the bridge. That's not a healthy relationship.
No.
Yeah.
And so, as much as I come to places and I say I am an ambassador for autism, every day, neurotypical non-autistic society is an ambassador to me.
Right.
And saying, hey, this is, this is who we are, this is what we want. And so there are autistic people who have sort of seen that other side of the fence and have had really tough experiences and turned their back on it and said, you know what, if that's the normal that I'm meant to be striving towards, you can keep it.
Right.
When we look at therapies that are designed only to hide someone's autism, don't wave your hands around, you have to behave in a certain way so that you can pass, to be indistinguishable from your peers. But,
Yeah,
but that's
again,
not who I am.
Right.
And hiding isn't a privilege.
You don't need to hide anything. You're a gift. Honest to God, you're God's beloved. We could talk to you all day about these
Oh,
things.
geez.
Could go on
Thanks.
and on and
But,
on. But yeah, no, you've really opened the eyes of not just us today, but I know opened the ears of our listeners and those on Facebook Live that have been
that didn't
watching as well.
drop
So
out because I
Elsbeth,
think we
we
lost the
can't thank you enough for coming in
Oh, yeah, no
again
problem.
and checking in with us and
Yeah.
sharing some of your work and your passions and sharing some of your life too. That's always
Yeah,
important. We
no
appreciate
worries.
that. Yeah. So good. We've had another great time in the Vickers Crossing. We appreciate our guests coming in and sharing with us and educating and again finding out different ways that we can see faith and the public square intersecting and making change in the world. So that's great. we're going to wrap things up. So, Kevin, people are listening or watching right now. They know where they are, but maybe they want to tell their friends where else.
Yeah,
where
let your
else
friends
they can
so
find
they
us.
can know they can find us on Spotify, SoundCloud, Buzzsprout. They can find us on YouTube, on your iPhone, on the podcast app. Through Apple iTunes.
Yeah.
You can find us wherever you like to listen to that stuff. You
We're
can
all
email
over.
us. Yeah. You can email us at vicarscrossing@gmail.com. Get your questions in to ask Iain anything. Questions you may have for Elsbeth. You don't know how to reach her, but we can.
We can.
So get in touch with us, and you'll find us on Twitter at Vicars Crossing and Facebook at Vicars Crossing. We'd love to have you listening to us live, adding your comments, and participating in a dialogue, because that's really what this is all about, intersecting as many of us as we can in the hopes of making the world a better place.
You bet. So we're going to have to say goodbye, but so we've got some gingerbread to eat.
Oh, yeah.
We got to
Yeah.
make that date before we get out of here. But also want to say hello and again thank you to our sponsors at Aleppo Restaurant on Wonderland Road and A. Miller George Funeral Home, where every life is celebrated, and their sister company Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. My name is Rob Henderson,
I'm Kevin George.
I'm producer Iain.
and thanks again to
Hi, I'm Elsbeth.
thanks for coming, and thanks to everybody for tuning in. We'll see you again next time, and remember, Kevin, always look both ways.
Before you cross the street.
Thank you for listening. Our hosts are Kevin George and Rob Henderson. Our producer and composer is myself, Iain, with original artwork done by Catherine Olenek. If you have any questions or want to know how to find us, tweet us at Vicars Crossing or find us on Facebook at The Vicars Crossing. If you have any other questions about anything heard on this podcast, leave us a comment or look in the description to find out more. Thanks!